Snow came early to the Fenwold that year, and it came wet. It soaked through wool before a body had gone half a mile, and it smelled of coal smoke and wet stone, and something colder underneath, like a held breath. Brenmore Hall stood at the end of the Coldbourne Road, the way a closed door stands at the end of a corridor. Grey stone, grey sky, no welcome in either. She was the kind of girl a room forgot before the door had shut behind her. Not pretty enough to be remembered, not plain enough to be pitied, just present and then gone, the way a draught is present and then gone. Her name was Frances Aldern, and she was 21, and she had buried her mother in the spring, and her father 4 winters before that. And she had a brother 6 years old, with a chest that rattled when the weather turned, and she had 11 shillings sewn into the hem of her second petticoat, and that was the whole of what she owned in the world. She could read. Her mother had taught her, evenings, by rushlight. The 2 of them bent over the same page like it was something warm. She could keep count without paper, could tell fever from chill by the back of her hand against a brow, could mend a hem so the stitch never showed. And she remembered songs. She had always remembered songs, the way some people remembered faces. Her mother used to say she had caught the habit like a cold, and never got over it. The notice had been nailed to the post outside the Coldbourne chandler's for a week. Boy wanted kitchen, Brenmore Hall. Strong back, honest hands, no followers, no questions asked about family. Wages paid quarterly. Frances had read it 3 times before she understood what it was telling her, which was that a girl need not apply, and that a girl with her father's name on her tongue would not get past the gate regardless. She cut her hair in the shed behind the widow Hurst's cottage, where Tam was to stay for his keep, and she did not let herself cry doing it. She bound herself flat with a strip of old sheeting and put on her father's second shirt, taken in at the shoulders, and her father's boots stuffed with wool at the toe, and she looked at herself in the cracked glass and saw a thin, plain, unremarkable boy looking back. Good. That was exactly what the notice wanted. The bridge before Coldbourne had a low stone wall she liked, wide enough to sit on, and she sat there the last morning before she went, with Tam's head on her shoulder, and told him she would send for him the moment there was a place for him too. They did not cry either. They had both learned not to, somewhere along the way, though neither of them could have said exactly where. Before the month was out, the house at the end of that road would come to know her twice. Once as a lie she told at the gate. Once as the truth underneath it. She did not know that yet. She only knew that the walk was 5 miles, and the snow was wet, and she had a boy's name ready on her tongue. The name was Frank. She had chosen it for how close it sat to her own, so that if anyone ever called her by her true name in a moment's forgetting, it would not sound so very wrong. She gave that name to the housekeeper at the servants' door before noon, cap in her cold red hands, and the housekeeper, a narrow, upright woman called Mrs. Pell, looked her over the way a woman looks over a bolt of cloth she suspects has been mispriced. "You're small for kitchen work," Mrs. Pell said. "I'm strong," Frances said. "Stronger than I look." "That's what they all say." "I don't say what isn't true," Frances said. "You may try me and see." Mrs. Pell held her eyes a moment longer than was comfortable, then turned and led her in without another word, and Frances understood that this was, in its way, a kind of yes. The kitchen at Brenmore Hall was low-ceilinged and enormous, black-beamed, hung with more copper than she had ever seen in one place, and it was already loud with the business of a house that fed 30 people twice a day, without complaint. She was given an apron, a place at the long table, and a warning, delivered by the head cook without looking up from her pastry, that idle hands got no supper in this kitchen, and neither did clever tongues. She kept her hands busy and her tongue still. It was not hard. It was, in fact, a relief, after 4 winters of being the one who had to speak for everyone. The inciting kindness came that same first night, though she did not think of it as anything so grand while it was happening. There was a girl in the scullery corner nobody spoke to except to give orders. Small, perhaps 12, with a stammer that came out worse when she was frightened, and a burn across the back of one hand that had gone an angry red and had not been looked at. Her name was Peg. She had broken a dish that afternoon, by all accounts through no fault of her own, and the undercook, a broad, sharp-tongued woman named Mrs. Grouse, had put her out to sleep in the cold scullery on bread and nothing else, as if that were simple justice and not simple cruelty wearing an apron. Frances watched this happen from the far end of the table, and said nothing, because a new kitchen boy who spoke up on his first night would not last the week, and she needed the week, and the week after it, and every week until Tam was grown. But she did not sleep. After, she lay on her pallet in the boys' loft, and listened to the house settle, and when she was sure of the stillness, she took her own bread, untouched, and a spare blanket from the chest by the stair, and went down to the scullery in her stocking feet. Peg was awake. Of course she was awake. Cold does not let a person sleep. Frances did not say much. She never did, when it mattered most. She wrapped the blanket round the girl's shoulders and put the bread in her hands, and took the burned one gently, and looked at it by the last light of the banked fire, and found willow bark in her apron pocket, saved from her mother's old stores, and made a poor paste of it with water from the pump, and bound it with a strip torn from her own shirt-hem. "You'll want that shirt," Peg whispered. "You'll be cold." "I've another," Frances said, which was not true. "Why are you doing this? I can't pay you nothing." "I didn't ask you to," Frances said. "I'd have done it for any creature left out in the cold. It isn't a kindness if it's owed something back." She sat with the girl until her breathing slowed and evened into sleep, and then she went back up to the loft, colder than she had been in weeks, and did not regret it, and told herself firmly that no one had seen, and that it did not matter either way. She was wrong about the first part. Above the scullery, where the old servant's stair rose past a narrow window that looked down into the yard, a man had stood in the dark for the better part of an hour, unable to sleep himself, as he had been unable to sleep on this date for 11 years running, and he had seen the whole of it. The bread, the blanket, the willow bark, the refusal, twice, of any thanks. She did not know then that the Duke of Brenmore had watched a strange, thin kitchen boy tend a stranger's burned hand by the last light of a dying fire, and ask nothing for it, and that he would carry the sight of those bare red knuckles with him longer than he carried almost anything else that year. Peg tried to thank her again in the morning, in front of the whole kitchen, which was the last thing Frances wanted. She turned it aside with a shrug and a mutter about the girl imagining things, and went back to her scouring, ears hot, and thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. It was, in fact, only the beginning, though the beginning came dressed as coincidence for a good while yet, and she had no reason on earth to read it any other way. 3 days after that first night, Mrs. Pell informed the kitchen, without explanation, that the new boy, Frank, was to be moved off scullery duty and given the lighter work of the still-room and the upper pantries instead, along with an extra portion at supper, on account of the heavy lifting his old post required. Mrs. Grouse grumbled that she had never known heavy lifting to require moving a boy off the heaviest work there was. But Mrs. Pell only said that the order came from above her, and left it at that, in a tone that closed the matter. Frances did not question good fortune. She had learned young that questioning it only invited someone to notice they had given it to the wrong person. She did not know that the order had come, in fact, from a man 2 floors above the kitchen who had given it without saying why, and who had told Mrs. Pell only that the boy was to be watched, not troubled, and given whatever small ease could be managed without remark. Peg's burn healed clean, faster than such things generally did, because on the 4th day an apothecary's boy came up from the village with a proper salve and a proper bandage, sent, he said, on the instructions of someone at the hall who wished not to be named, and would say no more than that when Mrs. Pell pressed him. Peg wept over it, quietly, in the pantry, and told Frances it was a wonder, and Frances agreed that it was, and privately thought that wonders in her experience generally had a name attached somewhere, and that this one apparently did not. She did not know that the name was Julian Vane, and that he had sent the boy from his own purse, through his own steward, with instructions so plain and so absolute that not even Mrs. Pell had dared ask a second question of him. She saw him only twice in those first weeks, and both times from a proper servant's distance, across a hall or down a corridor. A tall, dark-eyed man, who did not look like what she had imagined a duke to look like. No powder, no lace to speak of, a face that had been struck hard by something once, and had simply set that way, jaw and brow, like a door pulled shut and latched. He did not smile at anyone that she saw. He did not, so far as the kitchen gossip ran, smile at anyone at all, and had not been known to for some years, not since his mother died when he was a boy, not since his father followed her some years after, leaving him the title and the grief both together, before he was truly ready for either. She thought nothing more of him than any kitchen boy thinks of the man whose plates he never expects to carry. She had her own grief to mind, and her own brother's chest to worry over, and a letter to write him each Sunday in a hand she kept careful and small, so as not to waste the paper. She did not know, writing those letters at the kitchen table, by candle stub, that the man 2 floors above her was, in his own way, keeping just as careful a watch on her as she kept on Tam, and asking just as little credit for it. The proximity came, as it so often does, through no planning of her own. A footman named Corliss took a fever in the 2nd week of her service, and the household was short-handed for a private dinner the Duke was to take with his cousin, Lady Selina Vane, who had been residing at the Hall since the autumn on the pretext of keeping her bereaved relation company, and who had opinions freely given about how a great house ought to be run. Mrs. Pell, with no better option to hand, pressed Frances into service to carry dishes, on the strength of her steady hands and her quiet manner, with a warning that she was to speak only if spoken to, and preferably not even then. "I don't know how to serve a table, my lord's table," Frances said, honestly frightened for the first time since the gate. "Then you'll learn tonight, Mrs." Pell said, not unkindly, and showed her in 10 rushed minutes how to carry a tray level, how to serve from the left and clear from the right, how to stand at the sideboard with her eyes down and her hands still until wanted. She thought she managed well enough. She kept her eyes on the plates and her feet quiet on the carpet, and did not once let the tray tip. Lady Selina spoke a good deal, mostly of people Frances did not know and matters that did not concern her, and the Duke spoke very little, and ate less, and seemed to Frances's untrained eye like a man enduring a meal rather than taking one. It was pouring the wine, her hand steady on the neck of the decanter, that she began, without noticing she had begun, to hum. It was a small tune. Soft, low, 5 notes climbing and 4 coming down again, the kind of thing hummed without thought, the way her mother had hummed it over the washtub and the mending basket her whole life, and had taught it to Frances before Frances could properly talk, and had never once said where she had learned it herself. The room went perfectly still. Frances did not notice at first, intent on the wine, and it was only when she looked up to see whether she had poured enough that she found the Duke of Brenmore staring at her as if she had struck him. "Stop," he said. She stopped humming and stood frozen with the decanter still tipped, wine threatening the edge of the glass. "Not that," he said. His voice had gone strange, tight, careful, like a man walking on ice he was not certain would hold. "Say that again. What you were humming. Say it again." "I don't know as I was humming anything in particular, Your Grace," Frances said, which was true, and also, she understood at once, entirely the wrong answer. Lady Selina set down her fork with a small, precise click of disapproval. "Julian, the boy is only humming. Servants hum. It is what they are for, largely. Leave us," the Duke said to his cousin, not to Frances, and something in the flatness of it emptied the room faster than any raised voice could have. Lady Selina went, with a look at Frances on her way out that Frances did not much like the shape of, cool and measuring. The look of a woman filing something away for later use. When they were alone, the Duke rose from the table, which frightened Frances more than anything else had that night, because dukes did not rise for kitchen boys, and stood by the hearth with his back half turned, and asked her, in a voice gone low and careful, where she had learnt that tune. "My mother, Your Grace. She used to hum it, over her work, mostly. I don't know that she ever gave it a name. Is your mother living?" "No. Your Grace. She died this last spring. Did she ever say where she learned it?" "No. Your Grace." "I never asked. It was only a tune she hummed." "I didn't know it was anything." He was quiet a long moment, staring into the fire, and when he spoke again his voice had smoothed itself back into something closer to ordinary, though not entirely. "That will be all," he said. "You may go. Say nothing of this to anyone." She went, glad to go, and did not understand what she had done wrong, only that she had done something, and that the Duke of Brenmore's face, when he said stop, would stay with her longer than she wanted it to. She did not know then that the tune she hummed without thinking had been the last thing his mother, the Duchess Helena, had ever sung to him, in the room where she died, when he was 9 years old, and that his own father, unable to bear the sound of it after, had forbidden it in every room of that house for 11 years, so absolutely that no servant under 60 had ever once heard it sung aloud there before that night. He did not sleep that night either, though this time it had nothing to do with the anniversary of any date and everything to do with the kitchen boy's plain, frightened, entirely truthful answer, which had told him a great deal and settled almost nothing. His mother had sung him that tune in the last winter of her life, in a room that smelled of beeswax and fever, her hand cool and dry against his hair, and it had been, for the whole of his boyhood after, the one sound he could not bear, and could not forget either, so that in the end he had stopped trying to do either, and simply lived beside the silence his father built around it, the way a man lives beside a locked door in his own house, and stops asking what's kept in the room. His mother had had one companion in her last years she had loved above the rest of her women. a quiet young maid called Susan, clever with a needle and quicker still with comfort, who had sat with her through the worst of the fever nights, and had, by all the old accounts he had never let himself ask for in full, been given the tune herself, taught it note by note in some quiet hour, a gift passed between two women who trusted each other and no one else in that great cold house. His father had dismissed every one of his mother's women within the month of her death, unable to bear their faces in his halls, Susan among them, without cruelty exactly, but without kindness either, a grief so total it had no room left in it for anyone else's. Julian had been 9. He had not understood then why the house went so quiet all at once, women he loved gone without goodbye, only that it had, and that asking about it made his father's face do something Julian never wanted to see again. He had not thought of Susan's name in years. He thought of it now, sitting alone by a dying fire in a room his cousin had just quit in temper, and understood, with the particular cold clarity of a man putting two true things together for the first time, that the kitchen boy's dead mother and his own mother's lost companion might very well be the same woman, and that if they were, then the boy's own mother's name had not, in fact, been Susan at all, judging by what little he had seen and the shape of that too careful, too guarded, too watchful face. He called for Mrs. Pell before the fire had burned down another inch, and asked her, in the plainest terms he had used with her in years, to find out everything that could quietly be found out about the boy called Frank, his family, his people, his mother's maiden name if it could be had, and to do it without the boy's knowledge and without a whisper reaching Lady Selina, who had, he did not need telling, already begun to wonder. He did not tell Mrs. Pell what he suspected about the boy's hands, too fine for a labourer's, or the boy's voice, which cracked toward high more often than low, or the binding he had glimpsed once, briefly, beneath a loosened collar in the still-room doorway, and had said nothing of, out of an instinct he did not fully examine, and would not, for some weeks yet, name to himself as protectiveness. He only said, "Watch him, and see he comes to no harm, and tell no one," and Mrs. Pell, who had kept harder secrets than that in her time, said only, "Yes, your Grace," and went to do it. Lady Selina Vane had not survived 3 seasons in society and a great many more at Brenmore without learning to read a room the way other women read a book, and what she had read in the dining-room that evening, before she was sent from it, troubled her considerably more than her cousin's ordinary moods. She did not care particularly for kitchen boys. She cared a great deal, however, for the succession of Brenmore, and for her own place near the centre of it, which she had spent 2 careful years arranging, and had no intention of losing to some fit of grief-softened sentiment over a servant with a pretty humming voice. She found the boy 3 days later in the passage outside the still-room, bent over a scrap of paper with a stub of pencil, writing something small and careful in a hand far too fine for the son of any labourer she had ever employed. "What is this?" she said, plucking the paper from his fingers before he could hide it. "A letter, is it? To whom does a kitchen boy write letters?" "A letter, my lady," Frances said, standing very straight, her ears hot but her voice level. "To my brother. He's not well. I like him to know I'm thinking of him." "How touching," Lady Selina said, and her laugh came out in 3 small practised beats, a sound Frances would come to know very well before the winter was through. "A kitchen boy who reads, who writes a hand better than my own steward's, who hums songs my cousin has never once explained to me. You are a very unusual sort of servant, Frank, whatever your name truly is. I don't know what your ladyship means." "I think you do," Lady Selina said, and looked at her a long moment, cool and unhurried, the way a woman looks at a locked drawer she has decided, sooner or later, to open. Alden, isn't it? Mrs. Pell let it slip. I have heard that name before, in connection with this house. Nothing good, as I recall. We shall see what else there is to hear. She left without waiting for an answer, and Frances stood very still in the empty passage for a long moment after, her hands, she noticed, not quite steady, though she made them still before anyone else could see. She did not know that the Duke had come as far as the turn of the passage in time to hear the last of it, and had stood a moment himself, jaw set, before he thought better of stepping forward and revealing more than he was yet ready to reveal, and had gone instead to find Mrs. Pell and press her, urgently now, for whatever she had learned. Winter deepened over the Fenwold. The road to Colborne froze hard enough to ring under a cartwheel, and Frances's Sunday letters to Tam grew shorter, her fingers too stiff by candlelight to write more than a page. She heard nothing further from Lady Selina for the better part of a fortnight, and told herself, against her better judgment, that the woman's threats had come to nothing, the way half of what the highborn said to servants generally did. She was wrong, and the reckoning came, as such things so often do, over something small. She had gone up before dawn to bring in wood for the breakfast fires, her arms full, her shirt collar loosened against the heat of the kitchen behind her, when the load shifted, and a log caught her wrist wrong, and she went down hard against the stone step, the wood scattering, her shirt tearing at the shoulder seam, where it had been let out too many times already. Mrs. Grouse was the first to reach her, hauling her up by the good arm with more roughness than concern, and it was Mrs. Grouse's sharp eyes that caught, in the grey half-light, what the torn shirt had let show beneath. There was a silence in the kitchen yard of a particular terrible kind. "You're no boy, Mrs.," Grouse said, flatly, as if she had caught someone at the till. Frances did not deny it. There was no denying it, not with her collar hanging open and her wrist throbbing, and every eye in that yard fixed on her. She straightened slowly and pulled the torn cloth closed with her good hand, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left to say that would help her. Word travels fast in a great house, faster than any letter, and it had reached Lady Selina before the breakfast bell rang. She had Frances brought before her in the servants' hall, the whole staff assembled. Mrs. Pell White faced at the edge of the room, and she took her time about it, the way a cat takes its time. "Frances Alden," she said, savouring each syllable. "I did wonder. A girl, dressed as a boy, worked her way into a duke's kitchen under a false name. And an Alden besides. Do you know, I remembered the name at last. Your father was dismissed from this estate for theft, was he not? Thieves and liars, both of them, it seems, father and daughter, and now the daughter creeps in under her brother's coat, and her father's shame together. My father did not steal," Frances said, and her voice, though quiet, did not shake. "He was accused, he was never proven. It broke him all the same, and it killed my mother slower, and it left my brother with nothing and no one but me. I took the only work offered to a person in my place. I have stolen nothing here. I have lied about my name and my sex and nothing else, and I will answer for that much and no more." Lady Selina's laugh came again, 3 beats, cold as the yard outside. "You will answer for it by leaving this house within the hour, without a character and without your final wages, and you may thank me that I do not have the constable sent for besides. I am certain his Grace, when he learns what manner of creature he has been keeping under this roof, will thank me for it as well. Frances looked once toward the door, half hoping she would admit to no one that it might open, that the man who had ordered her extra bread and a stranger's medicine might come through it and say some word in her defence. It did not open. No one came. She would learn later that he had been sent for and delayed, deliberately, by a message of Lady Selina's own contriving, timed so precisely that by the time he reached the hall the servant's door had already shut behind her. She did not know that then. She only knew the door stayed closed, and that the silence behind it felt, in that moment, exactly like an answer. She gathered her few things without a word, said her goodbyes to no one because Mrs. Pell would not meet her eye, and Peg was not permitted from the scullery to see her off, and walked back out through the servants' gate into a morning gone hard and white with frost. Her wrist aching, her wages unpaid, her name known now for exactly what it was, and exactly what it had once meant in that county, which was nothing good. She walked the 5 miles to Coldbourne with her chin level and her eyes dry, because she had learned long ago not to cry where it showed, and she did not let herself begin now, in the open road, where anyone might see. She collected Tam from the widow Hurst's cottage that same afternoon, paid the last of what she owed from the 11 shillings still sewn in her hem, now down to 4, and told him only that the position had not answered, and that they would find another. He did not ask more than that. He had learned, too, not to ask questions that only made a hard day harder. They took a room above the chandler's shop that night, the cheapest to be had, and Frances lay awake long after Tam had fallen asleep against her shoulder, turning the whole business over and over. The Duke's stillness, his silence at the door, the way he had once said stop in a voice that sounded almost like grief, and could make none of it fit together into anything that felt like kindness, or coincidence, or anything at all but a great house's ordinary cruelty, dressed for one strange evening in something that had almost looked like care. She had resolved, by the second grey morning in that rented room, to write to a cousin of her mother's in the next county, and ask whether there might be work there, honest work, under her own name this time, however little that name was now worth, and to leave the Fenwold and Brenmore Hall and everything in it behind her for good. She did not get so far as writing the letter. Mrs. Pell found her on the 3rd day, having asked at every inn and chandler's shop in Colburn, until someone remembered a thin, quiet girl with a small boy in tow, and she came into that rented room out of breath and furious in a way Frances had never once seen her, and sat down across the narrow table without being asked, and said, before she had even loosened her cloak, that she had come to set a great many things right if Frances would only hear her out. I should have spoken sooner, Mrs. Pell said. I was a coward, and I am ashamed of it, and I will not be one a moment longer. You have been lied to, child, not by me, though I kept quiet when I ought not to have, but by the shape of what you were shown. His Grace knew, not from the first hour, but soon enough. He knew what you were within the fortnight, and he said nothing, and told me to say nothing, and to see you came to no harm, and I did as he asked, because it was not my place to do otherwise, though I have wondered 100 times since whether I served you rightly in it. Frances sat very still, her hands folded tight in her lap to keep them from shaking. Then he let her put me out. He let her call my father a thief in front of the whole staff, and he did nothing. He was not there to stop it, Mrs. Pell said. Lady Selina saw to that most carefully, and I will own I did not understand how carefully until after, when I found him in his study near midnight, having only just been told the whole of what happened, looking like a man who had been struck. He has not eaten a proper meal since. He has had every inn between here and the county line asked after you. He would have come himself, today, if I had not told him it wanted a woman's asking first, and a woman's word that you would even hear it. "Why?" Frances said, and it came out smaller than she meant it to. Why any of it? He never once spoke to me beyond that one night, beyond stop, and say that again, and go, say nothing. Why trouble himself over a kitchen boy's wages and a scullery girl's burned hand, and a name he had no cause to care for? "Because of the tune you hummed without knowing you hummed it, Mrs., Pell said, more gently now. It was his mother's. She died singing it to him, near enough, and no one in that house has been let sing it since, not for 11 years, not until you did, without even knowing you carried it. And because of what he saw before that first week, in the scullery, in the dark, when he thought the whole house asleep. He saw what you did for that child, and what you would not take for doing it, and he told me once, and only once, that it was the truest thing he had seen inside those walls, since before his mother died. He has been trying, in his own poor stubborn way, to look after you ever since, without ever once letting you know it was him behind it. I think he believed that was kindness. I have told him plainly that it was not enough of it, and that he owes you a great deal more than a physician's bill quietly settled." Frances found she had nothing to say to that for a long moment, and Mrs. Pell let the silence sit, and outside the window the Coldbourne church bell struck the half-hour, once, thin and clear in the cold air. "He asks only that you come and hear him say it himself, Mrs., Pell said at last. "He will not come himself uninvited. He was very firm on that point, said you had had enough of men deciding things over your head without your leave. But the carriage is at the end of the street if you'll have it, and if you won't, I'll go back and tell him so, and no more will be said of it, and I'll see your wages paid in full besides, which is only justice, and ought never to have wanted asking for." Frances looked at Tam, asleep still on the narrow bed, his breath coming easier than it had in days on account of the better fire she'd managed to keep, and thought of red knuckles and willow bark and a tune with no name, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that her feet had already decided the matter, before the rest of her had finished weighing it. The room he received her in was not the great dining hall, where she had once poured his wine with a shaking hand. It was smaller, warmer, a fire built up high against the cold, 2 chairs drawn near it, and he was standing when she came in, and did not sit again until she had, which she noticed, and did not know what to make of. He did not begin well. He tried 3 times to start and stopped each time, which she had not expected of a man so generally sparing with his words, and at last he simply said it plain, the way she had always preferred things said. "I knew what you were within a fortnight," he said. "Your voice, mostly, and your hands, and the way you tended that child's burn, as though you had done such things all your life, which no boy raised to kitchen work generally has. I said nothing, because I did not know what saying something would cost you, and because I found, to my own surprise, that I did not want to be the one who cost you anything. I told myself I was protecting your position. I have had a great deal of time this week to wonder whether I was only protecting my own comfort in not having to decide what to do about you." She did not answer that at once, and he did not fill the silence, which she noticed too, and thought, distantly, was not nothing. "The tune," he said, "is my mother's. She sang it to me the winter she died. My father could not bear it after, and forbade it the house entire, and I grew up believing it had died with her, until a kitchen boy hummed it over a wine decanter, without knowing he did, and I understood I was hearing my mother's voice again, after 11 years of silence, carried by a stranger who had no idea what she carried. Your mother was her companion. Susan, she was called then. I did not know the rest of her name until Mrs. Pell brought it to me this week. I am sorry for what my father did to her, dismissing her in his grief without a thought for what it cost her after. I am sorrier still for what my cousin did to you, in my own hall, while I was kept from the room by her own contrivance, and sorriest of all that I let a silence stand between us so long that you had cause to think I stood behind it willingly. I wanted to see who you were, he said, and this came slower, more careful than the rest, when you believed no one of any consequence was watching you at all. That is the only test I have ever trusted. Every other kindness I have been shown in my life has come with an account attached, sooner or later. Yours never did. Not to that child, not to me, not once. In all the weeks I watched you, did you do a single thing that asked for anything back. That is not a small thing to me. I do not think you know how rare it is. I want nothing from you now either, Your Grace, Francis said, low but steady. I did not come here for a place, or for payment, or for anything but to hear it said plain, since I have had a bellyful this month of things left unsaid. Then I will say the rest of it plain, he said, and something in his face, grave as it always was, eased very slightly, the nearest thing to an unpractised smile she had yet seen on it. I am not offering you a position. I am offering you whatever you wish, freely, with no claim of mine attached to any part of it, your wages in full, and more besides, for the wrong done you. A place for your brother here or elsewhere, whichever you judge kinder for his chest. And if, in time, once the wrong of this month has had a chance to settle, you should find you could think of me as something other than the man who let you walk out that door and said nothing, I would count myself fortunate, beyond any deserving. I will not ask you to answer that tonight. I would rather have your no, honestly given, in a month or a year, than a yes given only because a duke asked it of you, and you did not feel free to refuse. She sat with that a long while, the fire popping once, low, and somewhere beyond the window a rook called, a single flat note in the frozen dark, and she found, turning the whole of it over, that what steadied her most was not the wages, nor the offer of a place for Tam, generous as both were, but the plain fact that he had asked for nothing back, not even an answer, and had said so first. I will want more than payment if I am to trust this house again, she said at last. I will want to be spoken to plainly, always, whatever it costs to say. I will want never again to be left standing outside a shut door while someone decides what is to become of me. And I will want Peg looked to properly, apprenticed somewhere decent, out from under any hand that starves a child over a broken dish, before I will consider anything else you have said tonight settled at all. It is done already, he said. I dismissed Mrs. Grouse from this house the morning I learned what had been kept from me. Peg is to be placed with the housekeeper's own niece in the village, to be taught a trade properly, at my expense, whether you had asked it or not. And I will not shut a door on you again. You have my word on it, for whatever a duke's word is worth to you at present, which I suspect is not a great deal, and which I mean to earn back one plain day at a time. Thank you, she said, and it came out smaller and warmer than she meant. Do not thank me, he said. I have done nothing yet that deserves it. Then I thank you for saying so plainly that you have done nothing yet, she said, and something in his face broke open at that, briefly, into a real smile, the first she had ever seen there, unpractised, and a little startled at itself, as though he had forgotten the shape of his own face doing it. "Thank you," he said, for noticing the difference. Most would not have troubled. Winter turned slowly towards spring after that, the way it does in the Fenwold, reluctant and a little grudging about it, and Frances came back to Brenmore Hall, not as a kitchen boy, but as herself, under her own name, with her own hair grown back soft around her face, and Tam installed in the gatekeeper's cottage, where the good clean air off the fields eased his chest more than any physician's draught had managed, and Peg apprenticed to a kind woman in the village, who taught her lacework and never once raised her voice. Lady Selina Vane did not remain at Brenmore to see the spring in. She removed, with what dignity could be salvaged, to a cousin's house in Bath, and her letters, when they came, went largely unanswered, and after a while stopped coming at all, and the household found it did not miss her. Julian courted Frances slowly, deliberately, in the plain, unhurried way he had promised, walking with her in the winter gardens when the ground allowed it, sitting with her by the same hearth where he had first said his piece, asking her opinion on matters he had never once thought to ask a woman's opinion on before, and finding, to his evident surprise, that it improved his judgment considerably. He proposed to her in April, in the same small warm room, with no ring produced with any flourish, only his bare hand held out, and hers taken into it, and he drew the glove from her fingers himself, slowly, one finger at a time, before he asked her, as though he wanted nothing at all left between her hand and his own when he did. "Yes," she said. It was the only word she needed. They married quietly that summer, in the Coldburn church, with no great show made of a duke's wedding beyond what the title itself could not help but bring, and the whole village turned out anyway, because by then the whole village had heard, in one telling or another, what sort of woman was becoming their duchess, and thought it worth the walk. A year later, on an evening much like the one that had begun it all, cold coming down early, smoke rising thin and blue from the chimneys, Frances sat by the fire in that same small room with Tam, grown taller and easier in his breathing, curled on the hearthrug with a book, and Julian beside her with her hand in his, bare, both of them, no gloves between them any more in that house, not in that room. Somewhere below, in a kitchen no longer ruled by anyone unkind, someone was humming an old tune while she worked, unashamed, unforbidden, the notes climbing 5 and falling 4, and nobody told her to stop. Frances looked up at her husband and found he was watching her rather than the fire, the way he so often did now, and his hand did not let go of hers, and did not need to say anything at all for her to know exactly what he meant by holding it. A house may forbid a song for 11 years, and never once silence the love that first sang it. For what is kept from fear only waits for someone brave enough, and kind enough, and unwatched enough to sing it again.